Hello, everybody. My name is Cecilia Ottenweller. I'm the co-convener of the American Folklore Society Independent Folklore Section. This is a re-recording of what was originally a live panel session called Diversifying Folklore, given at the American Folklore Society Conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico, November 6th, 2024. There were technical issues with that recording, so here we are with a redo. I served as moderator, and my section co-convener, Karen Dietz, is a member of the panel. I wrote the original intro for an in-person audience, and I realized while I was editing the video that it was just too long for a YouTube recording, so I'll be brief here. I think of folklore training as a superpower. Our lens is powerful in ways no other field can touch, and the world needs us too. Our ethics and intention, our deliberate centering of culture bearers, and our mindful attention to reflexivity. Most of all, it needs our deep commitment to listening. Our panelists have long careers in testing and expanding the folklore skill set, and they've developed fresh insights into the relevance of our training and where new opportunities lie for the discipline. I'm really excited for you to hear what they have to say. We worked hard building these presentations. If you feel inspired, please be sure to leave comments for this video. We share our emails in the recording if you'd like to reach out to us directly. Before we get started, please grab a pen or pencil and something to write on. The live panel opened with a list of questions for our audience to consider before hearing the presentations, and here they are. Take a few moments to jot down your thoughts before you continue with the recording. So let's bring on our first speaker. Our first presentation is Folklore in the Field, Success in Corporate Life by panelist Karen Dietz, PhD, a folklorist, narrative strategist, and pioneer in transformational business storytelling. She has worked with Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, and entrepreneurs. She's a best-selling author, has contributed to 9 books on business storytelling, and is a TEDx speaker. Karen received her master's and her PhD in folklore from the University of Pennsylvania. She'll describe how she got into the field, the challenges that she encountered, and what she discovered about the broad applicability of her folklore skills and the potential of systems thinking. So, Karen, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Cecilia. And what a wonderful introduction. So let me share my screen and get my slides up here. There y'all go. So you can see this. And I shifted the title just slightly to Folklorists in the Field, Success in Corporate Life with Narratives, because my particular specialty, where I focused my attention in organizational life, was around narratives, because I thought that that was a really great, and it was a really great entry point into organizational culture. And of course, we're all here to learn more about how to diversify folklore and expand the opportunities and pushing boundaries for career opportunities. And so here we are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little tiny part of my journey. My journey is that's an interesting story. It would take about 15 minutes to tell, so we don't have that amount of time. But I'll share a little tiny part of how I got to where I am today. I'm also going to talk about the theories and the models I had to learn to make my work as a folklorist possible in corporate life. And I'll explain to you how I used my folklore skills every single day for the past 30 plus years. And I even have a few specific concrete examples I'll share with you. And of course, my desire for all that I present is that it may spark ideas for you as to what you want to do in expanding your opportunities as a folklorist out there in the world. But before we start, again, we are recording this and we'll also have a transcript available. And right now, if you take a picture of this QR code, it will take you to the files, the folder actually, where this presentation is available to download. Kate's presentation is available to download, and so is Mal's, right? And also those thoughtful questions that we post in the beginning. So those 4 documents are available for you to reflect on and to use as you see fit. All right. So back in graduate school, I ran across this book, Games Mother. All right, let me say that again. Games Mother Never Taught You. And it was subtitled Corporate Gamesmanship for Women. Well, I was studying vernacular architecture and material culture at Penn, and that was my go-to. That was my greatest love. But I was also curious about other kinds of cultures and corporate culture. And I read this book, Games Mother Never Taught You, and reading that book, my mind just exploded. It was like, oh my gosh, finally somebody is telling me what corporate culture is like and what kinds of games leaders and managers play, the communication styles, sort of their motivations. And it was all framed as, well, how do you enter that and survive all of that as a woman? And I thought it was brilliant. And so that stoked my curiosity. And then I finished my studies and everything, started to teach folklore courses at Penn. But I was having a problem, and I wasn't a very good teacher. No one had ever taught me how to teach. And I decided, well, maybe I needed a shift, right? And do something different. And the nearest shift from education that I could make, it was like a little bit of a slide right over into training, right? Corporate training. And I saw that folklorists also had a huge opportunity. There was new territory for folklorists in the for-profit world, that we have a very unique point of view around culture and what makes it work. And I felt we could really help organizations with both culture issues and change issues, because that's what folklorists do. We study how communities and groups and organizations sustain and maintain themselves over time, and how they transfer their knowledge, values, and wisdom in how to do that, right? In doing all of that, and what leader wouldn't want to know about that? So I saw that there were many opportunities, because hardly any folklorists that I was aware of were working in the for-profit world. So my unique point of view would not be subject to a lot of competition. And then I also figured out that I made a lousy employee, and so I was better off as an independent consultant going my own way. So again, teaching at folklore, launched my own training company. I joined 2 consulting firms over the years, and then in 2000, the year 2000, I went out on my own. Now you can tell I'm doing broad brushstrokes, and it would take us quite a while to dig down into some of this, but please send me an email, ask questions, anything that you need to kind of flesh out any of the material here. Well, the first thing I had to do, though, when I started out on my own, pretty quickly, I needed to figure out what my ethics are. Well, I knew what my ethics were, but even more important, what were the ethics of the clients that I wanted? So I asked myself, well, if I'm going to work with a client, what kind of ethics do I want them to demonstrate? And so I came up with a list pretty fast. I needed everybody to be open and curious and respectful. I wanted everyone to have a learning and growth mindset. I wanted everybody that I worked with to express their humanity and empathy. Right? If humanity and empathy weren't present, then I really didn't have any business working with them. They were somebody else's client and not mine. I wanted everybody to be relationship oriented. That means I wanted them to know and feel and experience that we were in a relationship together and not transaction. I have this project, you bid on it, you give me your parameters of time and effort. I'll agree. We signed a contract, and as soon as that's done, I'll never see you again because we're done. Right? So that's kind of transactional. And that's not sustainable, really, as an independent consultant. And then later, as I went on, after it didn't take me too long to figure this one out, but I didn't it didn't make it on my original list, which is no box checkers. What did I mean by that? Well, I did run into a situation where the management group that I was dealing with had been told by their superiors to go fix X problem, this problem. They hired me to help them fix that problem. But ultimately, they were never really invested in making any changes. They just wanted to check that box that yes, they were taking action on what their superiors wanted. So, like, okay, why bother with a situation like that? And I also wanted to make sure that they had ethics that guided them. Right? These clients had their own set of ethics, some that I may not have thought of, but they had a group of ethics that also guided them. So that was my list for how I want my clients to be ethical. What kinds of ethical um, behaviors did I want to see from them? And then also, it became pretty clear that I'm alone out here as a folklorist working in corporate culture. I was also quite alone in working with narratives back in 2000 with uh, as I was out on my own. So I also created a group of ethics that guided my relationships with colleagues so that we could sort of come together and be good colleagues for each other. So one is just colleagueship. Yes, I want to have a great relationship with you and be a thought partner with you and whatever. And really, it's focused on helping each other. And everybody to be open and sharing. That we were all focused on up leveling the quality of all of our work together. And also, we focused on citing and promoting each other and generating respect for each other. So these were things that have guided me over the past 30 years, and they're really important to figure out who your best clients are and who to stay away from. So what did I need to learn though? Right? Because folklore was great at understanding and researching and documenting and helping groups, right? Fabulous. But we're not very good at knowing what makes individuals tick and how personal transformation happens or doesn't. In other words, what allows somebody to change and what stops them from changing. And anybody who's working in a culture and an organization needs to know. You're working with individuals. So what makes them tick? Who are they? How are they going to operate? And how does personal transformation happen for them? So I got busy learning about individuals and change. I hired trainers from all across the US to address these topics in my own training company. And I learned the training business and also how to run a business. I was totally terrified I'd fail. That's another 15-minute story about how all of that got navigated and how I saw myself through that. But the bottom line is I did not fail. Eventually, I became a partner in a consulting company. Clients were IT departments, technology departments of the New York and American stock exchanges and major banks on Wall Street. I used my folklore training in culture plus narrative plus vernacular architecture to assess culture and behaviors. And let me tell you, this was quite a moment when I found myself standing on the street in front of the American Stock Exchange, ready to go in for my meeting, and I'm all dressed out in that great business uniform that we had, the dark blue suit and the briefcase and what have you, and I felt how bizarre. I'm a folklorist walking into the American Stock Exchange, but I quickly shifted that and said, well, of course, it's perfect. Right? And so in I went. Initially, I would conduct story archaeologies to assess the culture. I'd go all around the organization, collect as many stories, narratives that I could about people's experiences working there. And I would be able to understand what was working in the culture, what wasn't working in the culture, where stories were broken between different divisions, where stories were healthy. So anyway, I got to really dig into narratives in the organization as a window into culture. And then I delivered leadership and teamwork programs focused on personal transformation and then also upgrading the culture after that. So, what skills or training did I use as a folklorist every day? Well, of course, ethnography and fieldwork, which is also all about knowledge transfer when we add that, into the mix of what folklorists help with. And knowledge transfer is a big issue in companies. Personal and cultural awareness. This is from my classes with Ray Birdwhistle. Mal and I took Birdwhistle's classes at the same time at Penn, and I know he's going to talk a little bit more about that. Did interviewing skills, documentation skills, research skills, both synchronic and diachronic, through space and through time. Also, what I learned about the experience, care, and feeding of oral stories, and Ron Evans is a Native American storyteller who would come into Penn and Philadelphia when I was there, and I learned so much about the direct experience of very, very powerful narratives and sacred stories and the care and feeding of all of that. I also use vernacular architecture and material culture every single day because the buildings that these organizations are in, you can tell a lot by how they're organized and the social expression of culture by how they sort of manage the space and use the space that they have in their building as offices. And I'd walk around and look at all the material culture artifacts that were on the walls and people's desks and what have you. Again, another great avenue into culture. Foodways and cultural expressions and traditions. The 3-minute martini lunch is no longer, but there are other ways that foodways is really critical in an organizational culture. And then, of course, all my other folklore genres that I've been trained in, like genre, play theory, sociolinguistics, performance theory, even things like philosophy and physics. So those are the skills that I relied on every single day. I was working in corporations for the past 30 plus years. What else did I have to learn? First of all, I had to learn the consulting business. And so Peter Block's book, Flawless Consulting, that is the Bible. Anybody who wants to go independent, no matter if it's a for-profit world or the nonprofit world or working with entrepreneurs, this is the guide that will tell you how to do it and be successful at it. There's systems thinking. This is a systems thinking for beginners, an early book to grab and digest. It's all about how to think about cultures as a system. Where are you entering the system? What's happening to the system? What are the reinforcing loops and things of that sort? I also needed to learn corporate life cycles because as I went into an organization to work, I needed to know where they are in their corporate life cycle. Are they growing? Are they a bureaucracy? All of that would help me know where I am in the organization, what my role is, and what some of the issues that they're grappling with. I also love the essentials of appreciative inquiry. This was a way of working that I picked up 10, 15 years ago. And it is by far one of the most powerful ways I've learned to get at what's happening in a culture very quickly, but in a way that brings out the best in people. Then there's conversational intelligence that clued me into the kinds of conversations I was hearing around an organization and what is the highest level of conversational intelligence anybody can have to generate ideas, move things forward, move into the future in really great ways. And by the way, that's all based in narrative. And so that was a good one. And then The Nature of Order is by Christopher Alexander, one of my loves from vernacular architecture days. And his latest work in the early 2000s really articulates design principles. He has 15 design principles that map really well to a culture. So figuring out what a culture, what's going on there. So those are some of the additional bodies of work that I've managed to, acquire under my belt as I've worked in organizations and organizational life. So just look at some of the industries that I have worked with. And this is all around culture and narrative. So tech, cruise companies, chamber of commerce's, education. For many years, I've worked with foster youth and survivors of human trafficking to help them tell their stories in a way that really is empowering for them. Nonprofits, a satellite company, financial services, a theme park, right? So it's been varied, and this is just a little sample, right? But you'll see no pharma, no medication managers, which are the middlemen who, sort of broker how much you're going to pay for pharmaceuticals, and weapons manufacturers, politicians, lobbyists. All of those groups I'm just not interested in, or I don't like them, right? Or I have some ethical problems with. So you won't find any of those companies, and it's good to know who you're not willing to work with. So here's the ugly slide. This is the ugliest slide that I could make, I think, but it's illustrative because it goes, okay, here's the industry that I was working in. Here are the kinds of projects I worked in. And those red stars are when I had to develop new tools, new models, ways to work with both folklore and narrative for companies to advance. And you can read tech and IT, and I did one-to-one culture and work process and change. Cruise company, 2, I did customer stories. 3, I did women's leadership and personal development narratives. So you can go between the first 2 columns right next to each other, 1-to-1, 2-to-2, right? And you get an idea. The folklore skills on the 3rd column, that's just everything that I used all the time, right? You can't track it across those projects, but that's sort of how it maps out. So the bottom line, like for me, what's my bottom line? And what's kept me going all the years is asking myself these questions. Well, if I helped alleviate suffering for even one person at work, was it worth it? If I helped even one leader or manager be a better version of themselves, was it worth it? If I can appreciate even one person so they feel seen, heard, and valued, was it worth it? If I have helped even one team accomplish something amazing, was it worth it? And if I helped even one executive team have greater empathy and humanity, was it worth it? And if I helped even one severely traumatized person feel confident and proud of where they are today, was it worth it? And what do you think? I mean, for me, every day it's worth it. So here's a lot of information, a lot of opportunities. I tried to give you sort of the broad brushstroke of industries, folklore skills I use, kinds of projects that I did. So really, just take this material. Hope this gives you some ideas and go forth and be amazing. So here's how to reach out to me. My website and my email. You see my best-selling book, Business Storytelling for Dummies. Wiley approached me to publish that, and I finally said yes. And some people have told me over the years that this is really a great Bible for working with narratives and organizations. And there's, again, the QR code for where you can download all of our presentations and the questions for you to be able to use. So on that note, I think I'm done and time to turn everything back over to the panel.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was wonderful. I wish we could give you, hours and hours. Maybe we'll figure out a way to do that in other presentations. Okay, so our next panelist is Kathleen Ragan. She's up next with Systems Thinking, a potential powerful tool in the folklorist skill set. Kathleen is the editor of Fearless Girls, Wise Women and Beloved Sisters, and most recently, author of Why We Tell Stories, a human survival tool from folk tales to Facebook. She got her PhD from Macquarie University, Sydney, Australia, with a thesis on folk tales in an evolutionary context. She's going to take a deep dive into systems thinking, how it works, and in particular to folklore research. Kate, take it away.
Okay. All right. So I'll share my screen here. Here we go. Come on, do this right. Yes. Okay. So my name is Kathleen Ragan, and today I'm going to present an approach to a systems approach to folklore research. I was drawn to systems thinking because I was trying to think of a way to responsibly use big data. So today, we'll look at the narrative as part of three larger systems. First, we'll look at storytelling as a system. Then we'll look at storytelling as an information inheritance system. And last of all, I want to look at communication systems across evolutionary time. What I want to do is take a specific characteristic from each one, and then I'll show you how I build a context. And then we'll look at some of the results. What I'm hoping to do is show how systems thinking can generate new insights as well as new opportunities for folklorists. So let's start with storytelling as a system. Systems thinking requires us to look at the surrounding environment of any one part that we want to investigate so that we can see how all the different parts of the system work together. In my paper, Asymmetry in Male and Female Storyteller Priorities, I chose specific parts of the system that I wanted to investigate. I chose the text, the storyteller, the collector. But in order to carefully control my context, I wanted a worldwide data set, and what I did was I looked outside. I looked for an independent adjudicator. So I used Murdoch's Atlas of World Cultures to construct my worldwide data set. And then I identified the sources of each one of my tales. So I looked at the culture they came from, who the storyteller was, who the collector was. And then I also wanted to include the text in my tale. And to do that, again, I looked to an outside adjudicator, and I chose the subjects of the sentence. And then I counted all the male and female subjects of every sentence and clause in each one of over 1,600 tales. And I then set a threshold. So I said, okay, if over 2/3 of all the subjects in a tale were male, then that was going to count as a male tale. If over 2/3 of all the subjects and sentences and clauses were female, that was a female tale. And any tale that didn't reach that threshold, that was denoted a male-female tale. So what I had was a very specific context for each and every tale that I used. Then I looked at these tales in the context of gender, and very quickly the results. When males tell tales, be it to females or other males, they tell about the same percentage of tales. But moving on quickly, when females tell tales, we see different priorities. And I'd like to focus on that little yellow pyramid there. This is the inherently female situation. It's when females are telling tales to other females. And what you see there is a very distinctive balance of gender. And so this distinctive relationship between females and their tales was first uncovered here, and it was documented numerically. So in this case, I was able to uncover female priorities because I used big data. But systems thinking kind of kept me on the straight and narrow. It meant that I distinguished between collected, retold, rewritten, and literary tales, and I used only collected tales. It meant that I got a male and female storyteller for every single Murdoch group that I used. Okay, moving on very quickly now. What we're going to look at next is these are systems which can store and pass on information. Now, basically, there are four basic requirements for any information inheritance system. So you have to have heritable information. You have to have a certain amount of stability to that information. You also have to have the possibility for variation, and you have to have a selection mechanism. So what I did was I've gone for the most basic question: is there heritable information in folktales? I'm looking at narrative maps. These are narratives, they're stories that enable wayfinding. And like they help listeners remember landmarks or things like water holes. These are very prevalent among the Australian Aboriginal peoples, but then you go half a world away and you find that they're also very prevalent among the North American indigenous cultures. So systems thinking again, keeping me on the straight and narrow, I'm using Murdoch to construct my data set. Now, what we've done here is we've been looking at the oral world. And what I want to do now is show you how systems thinking can enable us to look across evolutionary time. Okay, what do I mean by that? In the history of human thought, there have been three major revolutions. With the invention of language, we entered the oral era. With the invention of writing, we entered the literate era. And now we are entering the era of computer-mediated communication and thought. So using systems thinking, what we can do is take a characteristic from any one of these eras. I tend to love to start with the oral era. And we can track that through all three eras and see what similarities or differences arise. So I'd like to look at communication systems across all three eras. And first, whoops, it skipped. First, a definition. Communication systems mediate the flow of information between sender and a receiver. There are some of the characteristics up there on the screen, but what I really want to do is, in a nod to the Journal of American Folklore special issue on fake news, I'd like to look at fake news in the context of all three eras in communication systems across all three eras. So let's look at the computer-mediated communication system. Okay, for a long time, when we began using computers, we thought of them as a pipeline. And what we thought was the information from the sender just flowed down through that pipeline to the receiver. But computers do not operate like that. What we're looking at with a computer is we're looking at an entity with its own language, its own preferences, and even its own environment. So what computer mediation does is it literally inserts a very different, separate entity between the sender and the receiver in the information flow. So let's look at this new participant, shall we? The current computer-mediated communication system is built around profit. The more clicks, the more profit. Now, there are two emotions which reliably elicit more clicks, more participation, and therefore more profit. Those two emotions are fear and anger. Therefore, computer-mediated communication favors, really upsetting information like fake news. It does not prefer truth. In fact, it prefers the opposite. So the function of computer mediation is not just to convey information from the sender to the receiver. It also adds the computer's preferences, which are profit, fear, and anger. Last but not least, computer-mediated system enhances its own environment. Now, this environment is specifically designed to elicit time spent, to elicit participation so that we get more clicks and profit, right? And it also shifts the focus of the interactions to the receiver. So what we've got here, we've got a person who's looking around, what am I interested in, scrolling down to the end, or it doesn't end, the Facebook feed. And an algorithm reinforces any hover, any choice. So in summary, looking at the design of the computer-mediated communication system, we see a profit-driven entity that devalues true information, and we see that entity interposed between the sender and the receiver in the information flow. The entity favors its own environment, which heavily favors fear and anger in order to elicit clicks and profit. Now, looking at that design, it's really obvious why fake news prevails. The system is designed to elicit and sustain participation. It's not designed for truth and distinguishing truth from falsehood. It's really just not set up for truth. So what I'd like to do now is show you how systems thinking informed this little analysis you've just heard. Okay, and what I want to do is look at communication systems in each of these eras. I'm going to take different characteristics. The first characteristic I'd like to consider is the environment. Okay, with the computer-mediated communication system, we see it has its own virtual environment. It makes a huge contrast to the oral world, where a lie, fake news, could have immediate and serious consequences, including death of the sender if the lie is discovered, or of the receiver if the lie is not discovered. In the oral world, the local, physical, and social environments were uncompromising judges of truth. I mean, a lion is a lion, right? So when we look at the literate era, we also see that it makes a strong differentiation between fact and fiction. Just look at our libraries. They are divided into fiction and nonfiction, right? But there's also a functional element. Take something like antibiotics, which were theorized, developed, tested, and then proved functional. And so when we get sick, we take antibiotics because we consider them to be true. All right, now I'd like to look, the next thing I'd like to look at is preferences that are baked into each of these systems, okay? So the computer-mediated system is profit, fear, and anger driven. Again, this makes a remarkable contrast to the oral system, where we are face to face with both our social environments and our physical environments. Also, the oral world was a very intimate world. So the people who were communicating with each other probably knew each other, or they certainly knew the reputation of the other person, or they'd had previous interactions with that person. And not only that, they shared the same social and physical frameworks. And these frameworks acted as constraints on the participants. Now, when we look at the literate world, what we see is a very specific system set up to separate truth from falsehood. And this was based on credentialed experts. So we have professors, we have PhDs, scientists. And so the literate system is a hierarchical communication system based on recognized credentials. Now, the last thing I want to look at is the creation of meaning in each of these systems. In the computer-mediated world, you can't get away from the computer. It's sitting right there between the sender and the receiver. And what this means is that the way we participants view the world is created by a computer-user combination. In addition, the computer has kind of shifted the focus of interactions to the user, the reader, the consumer, really. And so when we talk about the creation of meaning, we're talking about a computer user combination, a computer consumer combination. Again, in high contrast to the computer mediated system, we have the oral system, which was based very strongly on a shared understanding of the world between the sender and the receiver. This was look, in a group, consensus was really important, that we understood one another. Survival was important, and these were shared goals. Okay, moving on to the literate system. Literate system opted for a one-way sender-created message based on credentialed experts. So there we have our systems, our communication systems. In each of the eras. What I'd like to do now is step back and look at what does this tell us in the big picture. So both the oral and the literate systems have powerful mechanisms for determining truth. However, we've seen that the computer-mediated communication system is divergent from previous systems. And this is because we've got the computer in there between the sender and the receiver. And therefore we include the computer's environment, the computer's preferences, which are profit, fear, and anger. And that's how we have to include those when we create meaning in our world. So there's systems thinking for you. We've looked at it in the oral world, and now I've shown you how we can use systems thinking to go across all three eras of human thought. But what I'd like to do is re-ask the question, why is systems thinking so important? Okay, well, as we've seen, computer mediation is a thing. It exists, and it is influencing human thought. Therefore, when we work with big data, there are problems that we face. So, for example, big data sets determine the questions we can ask. We humans have a very flexible mind. Computers do not. So when push comes to shove, we accommodate the computer's limitations. For example, we have now figured out pi to the 62.8 trillionth digit. Why? Why on earth would we do that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the flexible mind of some researcher figured out a question that even with the computer's limitations, it could do better than any human could do. Okay, but is it a good question? I mean, is it important to our survival? Is it even useful? my point is that when we're using computer mediation, we limit our flexibility to construct the data sets and to ask the questions that a computer can deal with. That's not the only thing. Data sets also determine the answers we get. So for example, if we were to look at the gender of the collector and the gender of the tale, but skip the gender of the storyteller, we would get very, very different results from the results that we saw at the beginning of this talk. And you might ask, and rightfully so, what researcher would skip the storyteller, right? Well, I'll tell you why they would. The reason is that if you're looking for a worldwide data set and you don't want to create your own because Lord knows that's a nightmare and a half, the data sets that are free, that are worldwide data sets, that are digitized collections online, do not have information about the storytellers. So, back again to the information we include in the data sets, it's really important. And it determines not only the kind of analysis we can do, but also the extent of the bias of the results, and also literally the answers we get. Okay, last but not least, a data set can obscure our understanding and reinforce our lack of understanding of what we're looking at. Computers don't care about information, they really don't. They take what you give them and they work the data how you tell them to work the data, and they give you the results. So if you put in insufficient or incorrect data or incorrect assumptions, you'll get faulty results. So ultimately what you have to be able to do is recognize when the data you're getting back is kind of skewed wrong, right? So this is where systems thinking can really, really help us. Using systems thinking doesn't mean that you already know everything about the system you're looking at, every detail, every interaction. What it means is you've done your homework and you have a broad and deep understanding of the system, the whole system that you're looking at. And then you carefully construct a context that you really understand around the questions you want to ask. And systems thinking also means that when you can, you use somebody outside of your own, mind to as an independent adjudicator. So you mitigate your own bias. And most importantly, systems thinking means that you really, really understand the limitations of your results and that you communicate those limitations. A lot of times we think computer results are like no limitations. They have. Okay, another remarkable thing about systems thinking is that it has enabled us to elicit actual data from the oral folk narrative. And this data opens up thinking of the oral world to us. And with that perspective, we can then compare that with our own literate perspective and with the computer-mediated perspective. So this perspective over evolutionary time presents a unique possibility for folklorists because we have massive collections of folk tales and they're being digitized all the time. Not only that, we understand context and we understand process. We are possibly the only discipline with this kind of breadth of perspective. Okay, we are on the cusp of a very, very different world. When digital natives text or chat, they think of it as face-to-face interaction. But we know it's different. We know that it is computer mediated. So this distinction, which we see clearly, will soon be lost on digital natives very soon. And I mean, they really won't understand the difference. So it's an exciting world. Computer-mediated communication enables, just incredible forms of, scopes of communication. Speed increases, time disappears, and um, groups coalesce around hashtags instead of around proximity. So this is all very exciting, but it's also getting harder and harder to distinguish between whether you're talking to another human or a bot or AI. So this is a very new world, and to investigate this new world, we need new tools. Systems thinking is a new tool we folklorists should add to our tool set. Perspective across evolutionary time is another new tool we should add. With these tools, folklorists can become futurists as well. All you have to do is, well, look, I want to go back for 1 second. We are possibly the last generation who is going to be able to bridge the literate worlds and the computer-mediated worlds. Seriously, it's happening so fast. We are possibly the last generation. And as such, we are uniquely poised to understand this transition. And I want to bring up as an example how OpenAI is using a medievalist to help with the detection of AI threats using ChatGPT. So social media research firms need folklorists because we have the possibility of this enormous, this wonderful perspective across all 3 eras of thought. Okay, thank you very much. If you're further interested, you can look at my book, Why We Tell Stories, a Human Survival Tool from Folktales to Facebook. It's available on Amazon. And I've been working on this approach for a long, long time, so I hope you take a look. Okay, these are my references, and you'll see that I have some online data sets. These are beautiful data sets. The Icelandic one, they've even done us the favor of translating them all into English for us. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. And I'd like to go ahead and reinforce that this is a lot of information on this slide, but all of the presentations from today's panel are going to be available through that QR code that Karen posted with her presentation. So thank you, Kate. All right, it's time to move on to our 3rd panelist. I'd like to introduce Mal O'Connor and his presentation, The Contribution of Ethnography to Organizational Consultation. Mal is a vice president and principal at CFAR, a private management consulting firm specializing in strategy and organizational development. For over 20 years, he's worked with business leaders to create sustainable solutions to complex strategic and operational problems in ways that engage people, strengthen culture, and build organizational resilience. Prior to this role, Mal has held consulting engagements for aerospace, healthcare, insurance, and other industries. He's also held prior speaking engagements with groups like GPSEG, which is for HR executives in the greater Philadelphia area, the National Center for State Courts, and numerous healthcare systems throughout the country, an industry in the midst of some very truly awful turbulent times right now. Mal received a PhD in folklore from the University of Pennsylvania and is currently an adjunct faculty member at Cornell University in International Labor Relations. He's teaching executive education work with global companies and countries like Kuwait, developing their next generation of executives. He'll focus on our work as ethnographers and how that applies so nicely to working as a consultant for organizations. Mal, it's all yours.
Thanks, C. Okay. I've been fascinated by the first 2 presentations. I have to say, in fact, I would encourage those of you who are interested not to just listen once. I've had the benefit of hearing Karen and Kate now 2 or 3 times and C's introduction a couple of times, and they're they're very rich and valuable. Um, so I'm Mal O'Connor, and thanks for the introduction, C. Uh, I would like to talk about the value of ethnography and the ethnographic skills that we're trained with into the kind of consultation work that I've been doing for it's no longer 20 plus years, more like 30 plus years, but that's okay. And uh, to begin with, I'd like to cover 3 points. And the first is a consideration of organizational consulting as applied folklore. The second will be a discussion of our training and development as folklorists and how it offers preparation for the kind of work that I do. And you're going to hear some obviously repeating themes uh, as you already have. And then I'd like to spend a little bit of time on opportunities that are available for us in applied work with and inside organizations. So I think I use the applied folklore definition that David Hufford developed. I love his succinct way of putting things. That applied folklore is the application of folklore tools and methods to the solution of practical problems. You name the field, and you could imagine the application. And then the question is, but why choose organizational consulting? To what purpose? And while it may sound obvious, it's nonetheless true that we spend so much of our lives working with others in organizations large and small. And organizations are always struggling to manage the tension between developing people and retaining them and staying afloat financially and increasing productivity at the same time. And that means that culture enters the scene right away, often described as the we don't know exactly what's going on here, but we think we have a cultural problem. And the beautiful thing about culture is that that's our forte. We study it. We know how it works. And so culture becomes a business problem. And it's a very, very critical one to the success of almost every business. And the more mystery we can take out of understanding how it works, the more value we can provide to people who, as Karen said, are, if we can help a few of them, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And so we bring a lot of skills that I think, and this is the purpose statement for me, it will help make people's working lives, since we spend so much time doing them, as meaningful, fulfilling, and productive as possible. That's the reason for me. So much like field work, organization consulting requires managing the most important boundary we have, the management between ourselves and others. We do that every day in our field work, and we do it every day in organization consulting. And how we manage that boundary, as we've heard already, effectively and ethically, shapes the quality and the outcomes of our work. And we all have choices about what we say yes to, what we say no to along the way. And what I mean by boundary in organizational terms is that a boundary is a space where we negotiate meaning, self and other, with each other as it relates to the task at hand that we think we're trying to accomplish, which may or may not actually turn out to be true, but it's what we're working with at any given time. So I'd like to go a little bit deeper into about 4 things. And systems thinking, as you've heard a great deal about, we'll just give it a little slant on from an organizational point of view. The importance of context, again, something we study and value highly, and ethnographic tools and methods specifically, some of them, and how culture works. These are all things that we are trained to understand, and I believe we can put to use on a regular basis. in organizational work. So by systems thinking, and this will sound very much, I think, like what you just heard so beautifully from Kate, is that a system, like a culture, like a community, is a cluster of elements or activities interacting with each other to form some kind of unified whole. And with a systems thinking lens, that means that the whole is an entity of its own. It's not the same as the sum or the collection of the individual parts. And this is a kind of an easy idea to kind of, oh, I get it, but not really an easy idea. It's taken me years to be able to understand how the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts, or it can be less than the sum of its parts. So in the study of organizations and working with organizations as a whole system, we're looking for identifiable patterns of activity that are repeatable, that take place over and over again, and the norms for participating in those activities or not being allowed to. And that is not unlike, who gets to tell what proverbs or stories or whatever in a specific kind of context in a community, if you're thinking of the community as a whole. It's the interactive patterns. And as Kate was saying, it's the storyteller, it's the collector, it's the text, it's all of that text, texture, and context interacting with each other that create those patterns. We enter them. Kind of like the old Alice in Wonderland story with the Cheshire Cat. And the Cheshire Cat appears and smiles, and then the Cheshire Cat leaves, departs, but the smile's still there. Because the smile is the interactive, the pattern, the form that gets taken up in that context. So, and if we study groups as a whole inside organizations, we're looking at both the person and the role. We'll talk about that in a minute. The roles people take up in the group. So it's not just the same as individual to individual or interpersonal one-on-one reactions. A group is an entity all its own that has its own dynamics, its own patterns of activity that each of us enters and exits. So what does it mean? When we go into an organization as a consultant and we're looking for these interdependent, repeatable activities that are designed to accomplish certain things and may or may not be successful at it, we usually pay attention to things like, but this is not the whole story, but just a few examples, negotiating entry. How do we enter an organization? Well, as field workers, I remember doing some work with the Amish community for many years out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I was on a project and I had a wonderful guide who was a bookbinder introducing me to all of these different people who made different parts of buggies, had their own small businesses. And I was interested in innovation and how the Amish works so amazingly with interesting tools and values. And we walked out of a wheel bender, a wooden wheel bending shop. And my guide, Abner Byler, said, Mal, I think that Moses really understood what you're trying to get. And he really gave you some wonderful help and information. And I said, Abner, we've been doing this together for 4 or 5 months now, and I've met a lot of people thanks to you. And are you telling me this is the first time that I've actually been able to literally enter and make the kind of connection that's going to be mutually valuable? And he basically said, yeah, record time. So, and that, that's our fieldwork story. When we enter an organization, it all depends where you enter. If you enter into human resources, that's wonderful in certain ways and totally limiting in others, because most people who have responsibility for big budget line, they call it line production of things, find HR is kind of like a little gnat that's wagging on their tail and they like to shake it off some, So where you enter enables you to locate yourself and then move from one part of the system to another. but only if you recognize the context and the limitations and opportunities of that entry point. The person and role boundary management is always important. We were just talking about groups, and in groups, it's often interesting because someone may have a title like president of something or vice president of something, and they go in and they enter a meeting in a group that has nothing to do with their expertise, and it's not really their meeting, but they feel that because they have the authority that comes with this particular title, that they can say whatever they want, and oftentimes that will steer a meeting in an awkward way. And what they're doing is they're they're not paying attention to the way they are taking up their role in that meeting, and they can shoot themselves in the foot. And I do a fair amount of coaching work with people who have had that experience, and so it's trying to help them understand who they are both in their person and who they are personally and their role and how those affect other people in different contexts, whether it's scary to them and other people will shut down or other people get angry at them, whatever it may be. But these are really critical interactions between who we are personally and and the role we take up at different times. And I should probably stop there on that. That's like another one of Karen's 15 minutes. So finally, on the third thing is and Kate really alluded to this beautifully, I thought, in terms of the part-whole relationships of systems and how the interaction effects make a difference in terms of the data you get and what it means. And on this, I was thinking about this example quite a few years ago in a state that I won't mention, where all of the different commissioners of the different departments of the state government were supposed to come together if they had any connection to child welfare. So you had public health and communications and child welfare and finance, and you can imagine. And we invited all the commissioners and we said, please do not send a representative because this is the governor said this is a critical thing, we're going to do it. So some of them, of course, politically testing the water, sent a representative. And so the reason we found out what was possible and what was not was we paused and said, okay, would each of you say a little bit about who you are and what your authority is to make decisions at this table? And we went around, and after a while, we found out that there were 2 or 3 out of about 15 that disregarded the request and said, oh, I'm the deputy, whatever it is, and I don't have the authority to make decisions. I only have authority to plan. And so we weren't going to get anything done at that meeting because the request of the governor was denied. And it just showed how quickly any part of the system can undermine the whole, because we needed the whole system at play, everybody who had a part to play, in order to make a decision under time constraints. And so you can imagine what happened after that meeting in terms of the governor calling these 2 or 3 commissioners. Anyway, it turned out to be a lot of fun. So the second thing about our skills and training is we understand the importance of context. And I would like to mention that maybe there are 3 levels of context we'll focus on today. The people working in the organization, each individual and group, departments in an organization, and the whole organization all work in context, although they're not the same. And so the external, if you take I love the work, for example, that Mia Owens is doing in Louisiana. Here's a state folklorist who's worked for years and years and years on the effect of celebrating traditional arts and community, and how the arts bolster and reinforce community culture. And now she's doing work on climate change, which is critical in Louisiana because whole communities are having to move as a result of climate change. So the external context is obvious, critical climate change efforts. And the internal context is what happens if you're a community and you have to transplant yourself to another community. How are you received? How are you rejected? What does that mean for your own traditions and so forth? And she's doing marvelous work there. And on the consulting to organizations side, I've got a client who's a healthcare system, and they have gone through COVID. The fire from a health system nearby sent all the patients to their hospitals, which meant they were losing more than $1 million a year. I mean, $1 million a month on this, and they still had to take care of these patients because that's their mission. While that's happening outside, internally, people are saying, well, how do we manage this incredible increased volume? Everybody's stressed out completely. We're having trouble keeping our nurses, et cetera, et cetera. And so how people are organized to get work done inside while facing the external pressures creates this double layer of context that we are particularly well suited to understand because we understand the nuances of how context affects everything. So we have this opportunity to introduce our ethnographic tools and methods. And a lot of the things I've said obviously connect with that already. And what I found though is amazing is how interested clients are often in the value of these tools and methods. So I sat around at a wonderful kind of dinner. This insurance company I used to work for a long time, and this guy, people used to love to do this. They say, "Oh, I looked you up." And I said, "Oh yeah, what was it?" I said, "Oh, you're a folklorist. What's that about? Telling stories around a campfire?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that's exactly right. And here we are at dinner, and this is a campfire. And I want you to watch who's saying what, who's not saying what, who's trying to get somewhere with somebody else, who wants somebody else's job. Let's just take a look at that while we're listening in on the conversations." And then this meeting we were at today, that was another campfire. And and gradually he started to kind of warm up. And then, I think specifically some of the things that we bring ethnographically are so valuable that he really started to enjoy these things. So, for example, we talked about, field work. It's not a mining expedition where you go dig and bring stuff back and say, here it is. I've got the answer. It's really much more about socially constructed dialogue and this emergence of how work takes place. That we know that you can go in and try and interpret something and make believe you know what it is, but unless you describe the interactions first and understand the texture of those interactions, you're not going to have an interpretation that's worth anything. That in addition, our ability, and I think C mentioned this early on, to reflexively identify and test our own assumptions and do what Kate talks about in terms of, outside adjudication to challenge our own bias. Those are things that we bring and are trained to do in order to understand, and we can use them to help clients understand, how they can best meet their objectives. And I'll tell you, the one I struggled with the most was my own understanding of authority and how it worked. As a folklorist, not unlike many of you, I imagine, we're with the people, and so when I went into organizations and I was working with frontline people, it was a dream. They talked, they turned on this, they told me their stories, everything was really great. When I started working with management and then with top level of leadership, what I found was my bias about what they were and who they were and how they sold out and how they were compromising their lives and really challenged me, because what I discovered was that as people in roles, those roles shaped a lot of what they were able to do and not do, and a lot of what other people thought about them. It was like people would throw their assumptions, just like I was doing, on other people as if they were a projection on a screen. And it took me a long time to realize that part of my challenge was to be comfortable enough with my own sense of authority so that I could determine when and if I thought a client that I have needs to be challenged because he or she is uh, affecting people in ways that are harmful to them and to the work they're trying to accomplish. So that took me a long time, and I'm still working on it. But I think we all have a lot to do because as folklorists, because I think what you find is it's not the individuals or the people at any level, top, middle, bottom, frontline, customer base. It's really how people occupy their roles. So I'll pause there on that. And we see, as people who know that culture is not abstract, we see cultural performances enacted everywhere in everyday life. Same is true in organizations. And we can use our folkloristic ideas and methods to help understand those. So in organizational terms, how products and services are made are repeatable pattern cultural performances. How meetings are composed and structured and who gets to be there and who doesn't. Who's included in decision making, how decisions are made, why and where and how and whom information is shared with. Even the financial analysis of balance sheets and income statements are fundamentally storytelling with numbers based on a set of assumptions that may or may not be correct. So we have a lot of opportunities. And I'd like to start closing by saying, well, what do we do? How do we take advantage of these opportunities? And while this isn't the whole story, I think if we have to start where we are. And our training gets us to the starting line. And you've heard that from each person here. And the underlying questions for each of us, as we, especially I think about all the young folks we met, young in career, folks we met at the at the conference recently in Albuquerque, and how often people were saying we need more of this kind of applied, with higher ed pressures and with public folklore positions not always being filled again. There's, we hate there. What are the jobs? Where am I going to find a job? And applied folklore offers lots of opportunity there. And we have to start just where we are, which is just fine, as each of us has said. That we have loads of things to offer. And the question really is, what do I want to do? What do I want to learn? How can I align my work with my professional goals? Because it's all about what we want to learn in the end. That's what we ask ourselves when we take on a career or any work. So then we can build on what we already know how to do. We know people love to tell their personal experience narratives, for example. And there are many people working in a whole variety of fields who would love sharing their experiences and expertise with us. And many folklorists, as C mentioned in the introduction, others who are already doing this can act as guides for the rest of us. So please take us up on that. And I think finally, it's important to take, we call them smart risks. I don't know how smart mine have been, to tell you the truth, but we call them smart risks. And the idea is to go ahead and test some assumptions about ourselves and others. I mentioned the one about my issues with authority, and especially with leaders, and see how they may stand in the way of the very work we want to do. We can turn those to assumptions and use it and really test those assumptions as we would test any hypotheses. I assume that the president of South Shore Health is a crook or whatever. Go ahead, test it, and we'll find out a lot about how we understand ourselves and our own sense of authority and who we are. So finally, others have paved the way for us, and here are some who have guided me. I won't read all this, but certainly Henry Blassie is a mentor of mine, whom you all know. Lisa Leahy and Robert Keegan, who have written a wonderful book on immunity to change, which tests those assumptions we were talking about. Ray Birdwhistle, who really studied how social systems communications work as differentiated from interpersonal or psychological systems. And then Barry Autry, who studies the ways in which top, middles, and front lines and customers interact in pattern ways, or don't, to help or hinder work being accomplished. And then finally, I'll just mention a book, A Moment You Can't Ignore, that I wrote with a colleague of mine, Barry Dornfeld, that might be helpful to you. I hope if you get a chance, you'll take a look at it. It's really about organizational culture and ways in which what looks like big trouble can actually open up an opportunity to a great future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mel. That was really informative and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed all of the presentations. I'm very grateful that we've had the opportunity to pull everybody together and re-record this. This would be where in our original panel, I threw it open and said, okay, let's have a conversation. But I want to put up 3 questions that we had for our live audience in Albuquerque. Karen, if you don't mind sharing those questions real quick. So here's the follow-up questions. So first of all, I want you to think about what ideas were sparked by these presentations. What steps would you need to take to make them real? What kind of ideas are you getting as far as, well, okay, if I start where I'm at, what's the next thing I need? What is it? What's the question I want to answer? What's the next thing I need to learn? What additional learning, training might you need? Where would you find that? Did our presentations raise any fears for you? If so, what are they? And then interrogate that. Where did those fears come from? I've heard a couple of different acronyms for the word fear. One is face everything and recover. The other one is F everything and run. Both of those work, but it's amazing how powerful it is to just to sit with that fear and find out more about what's under the hood. And then what are 3 things you're taking away from this session so far? And why do you think they're important? As we said earlier, we really want to hear from you. Use the opportunities to reach out to us, as well as leave comments on this video, and take a few moments to send some notes to us. And thank you very much for watching.